maybe Donald Trump himself, that, hey, we got your backside here. If things go awry, we will step in, but we're not going to overtly and directly participate in this unless you absolutely need us. I think that may be the case.
More tonight on Brandon House Live, folks. Thanks for your support. WorldviewFoundation.com. May God save America.
You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries, research, high-profile interviews, and the radio and television broadcasts of Brandon House.
Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
He just got off the phone with the White House, and Mr. Ambassador, let's just get right to it. How was that conversation? What can you share with us, if anything?
Well, I'm going to be very hesitant about sharing conversations with the White House and the media. I'll just say this. The absolute pleasure of working with the Trump administration is the clarity that the president projects. What he means what he says. From the very outset, from the very moment that President Trump met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in their first visit in February, they have both said that Iran will not achieve a path to a nuclear weapon. And they've been consistent on this. President tried, through the good services of his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to negotiate an end to this path to nuclear weapon. It failed, and we're willing to give it another chance if now the supreme leader of Iran understands, when he looks left and he looks right, and he's got nobody left next to him, that might be the time to give up entirely, to dismantle his nuclear weapons program, his ballistic missile program, and basically his design on the destruction of Israel. That's really what he has to give up.
Mr. Ambassador, could you give us an idea based on...
Welcome back to More War Monday. The Rob Maness Show's live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, Israel defends its vital interest. No nuclear-armed Iran. Operation Rising Lion started on June 13th with Israeli air forces attacking military targets aimed at destroying Iran's emerging nuclear weapons program. Of course, the terrorist regime in Iran eventually started firing waves of missiles at Israeli residential targets after the initial shock of the first attack was over. However, it appears so far that the Israeli attacks are being very effective, so much so that their air forces can range the battlefield almost entirely unopposed, reducing Iran's responses over time to fewer and fewer missiles in each salvo. I say so far because war is an unpredictable activity, folks, and those who say they can confirm this or that target is utterly destroyed, etc., are on a fool's errand until adequate bomb damage assessment is completed. Bomb damage assessment, the term BDA is used for that a lot. And much of that BDA has to be done at the targets themselves on the ground in order to be accurate enough to say something was utterly destroyed. You see the conundrum there? So here we are, amid calls, of course, for the United States to enter this war. All nuclear facilities now appear to have been struck at least twice. And at this point, but it will take much more than one or two attacks to destroy the facilities like Fordow. A larger question looming is that the regime might be so weak that the Iranian people rise up and remove them. I believe that the Iranian people, the Persians, have a small window of opportunity to do that. Well, my guest today to discuss all this is veteran TV news producer, host of the analyst Substack, former diplomat, and host of Real America's Voices show that's early in the morning, America Sunrise Early Edition. Jake Novak. Jake, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show.
Well, thanks for having me. And, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't confirm any takeout sites, but I can tell you this. Uber Eats and DoorDash in Fordow aren't working right now. You need to get food from somewhere else. Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Yeah. I don't think you can get pizza delivery there either, man.
Yeah, no pizza. No pizza.
So, Operation Rising Lion, why did Israel feel it necessity to do this at this point? Because the United States has the same vital national interest to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. So what's the difference there?
Well, the reports I've been hearing from my own personal sources, and some that are even very public, is that Iran had everything they needed to assemble a nuclear weapon and to assemble a warhead. And they may have even assembled a prototype somewhere in those nuclear facilities. And that was just a line that was beyond a red line for Israel, for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Netanyahu and a lot of Israelis like him. This is not just a Netanyahu thing. A lot of enemies of Israel within the United States and out try to pretend it's all about him. When honestly, his policies, Colonel Maness, are supported by an overwhelming majority of Israeli citizens. It's just him personally that isn't as popular. But his policies and his record, when you take his name off that piece of paper, are so popular. Well, anyway, he long ago decided that no matter what personal sacrifice he was going to have to make, he wasn't going to take chances with things like Iran. He wasn't going to take chances with things like Hamas. If it was unpopular at some point, or if he got some pushback, he still had to do it with his main goal of never putting Israel in an existential crisis ever again, or the Jewish people in an existential crisis ever again. So he had to go and make that decision right then and there. And yeah, there'll be some critics who'll say he did it because the political coalition was weak and he was trying. And those people are just so petty. It's just so pathetic. You've had an Iranian regime that's been trying to destroy Israel and Jews across the world and kill Americans across the world for 46 years. To pretend this is just some thing that started because of a bad poll that happened internally is just so naive and petty and frankly stupid. Iran, we know, was rushing towards this. If they had already started to assemble a prototype, that was way beyond the final line in the sand that Israel had put for a long time. So they really were you couldn't even argue they were a little late to this party. But the last thing I'll say is they also did this now because the ability of Hamas and Hezbollah to distract Israel and to hurt its abilities to really focus on Iran, that is over, right? Hamas and Hezbollah are still an issue, but nothing like they were even a couple of months ago, let alone a couple of years ago. Israel couldn't have done this 6 months ago or a year ago because too much of the threat at home needed to be dealt with. Again, still a problem, but the idea of Hamas launching off more than a rocket a day now is over. Hezbollah, the same story. So now they had the skies a little bit more free to deal with this bigger threat, which was Iran.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even the Syrian government, the new one, put out a statement saying their airspace is free to be used for offensive operations against the Iranians, which would not have happened. I'll be the first one to admit. I was wrong. I thought that they would be closing down everything if it came to something like this, and I was wrong. So I'm not wrong very often, but on occasion I have been, and that was one of them. So you watch American intelligence a lot, like I do, Jake. Why is our position, our public position, different then? Because look, I've been saying, as somebody that watched the North Korean breakout, both publicly, the public breakout, and what was in the intelligence material from the Pentagon. I was there when this all was occurring. The difference between what's public and what's non-public is very, very different, or at least it was in that case. That's why I've been saying that I thought the Iranians probably had between 5 and 10 warheads already built and developed, and they were in the process of figuring out how do we deliver them and mate them, and might even be close to mating them. And that's what I think the Israeli intelligence picked up on, is that they thought, and again, all this stuff is educated guesses based on pulling in thousands of pieces of information anyway, even on the intelligence agency part. I think that they thought they were seeing that a mating process start to occur, and that was their red line. But the United States is totally different on that. What is going on there? You think it's because it's the Biden holdovers?
Yeah, it could be that. It could also be that Israel has different assets in intelligence than the United States does. Colonel Maness, I tell this story very often, and it's kind of known in Israel, not talked about a lot for obvious reasons. But when the Shah fell in 1979, 78, 79, a lot of Persian Jews came to Israel. And I know for a fact that a number of communities, a number of larger groups were asked by Israel to remain living together on the same streets, on the same blocks, so that they could keep their Persian cultural heritage together, the way that they spoke, their accents, things like that, so that they could either be used as intelligence assets to them personally at some time in the future, or they would be able to listen in and surveil whatever Israel was able to capture on whatever assets from whatever assets they had there already, and to be able to discern what was real and what wasn't real. That's my long way of saying it's very possible, because of the massive number of Persian communities within Israel, that Israel might be getting better intel than the United States in some cases. Sure, there's also some people, I think, in the swamp, or whatever you want to call it, in DC, who are so pro-Iran, so anti-Israel, that they may be throwing cold water on realities that Israel couldn't ignore. That's possible as well. And I also think another thing's been going on that many of us heard for maybe even 4 decades, but not maybe that long, but probably about 3 decades, was this belief that Israel would never be able to attack Iran like they're doing now without massive support from the United States, and they would never get it. And B, they couldn't destroy Iran's nuclear facilities without a massive number of bombs in the United States that they don't have. It turns out, in my opinion, and I always felt this way, that those two things were always untrue. And I think that it wasn't just the enemies of Israel and the United States who were promoting that. I think at some point, Israel was happy for people to believe that too, because it sure looks like the belief in that BS put Iran's leadership in a false sense of security. They really didn't have proper defenses. And even after the attack started, Colonel Maness, they were having meetings of high-level people above ground where they got knocked off. So they really had a false sense of security. I think they were believing their own baloney. And we see the results of that now.
Yeah. A friend of ours, Sam Faddis, a former ex-CIA operative, he writes for his magazine. It's called And Magazine on Substack book. You can check it out. He put an article about the intel piece, and he said, somebody's been wrong about this, I think is what he said. And then the after title is, and it's probably us, the Americans. Look, like I said, my estimates are all based on what I learned in watching the North Korea breakout, and not really from anything specific, quite honestly, because I don't have any intel access anymore. But I can certainly watch and see things that are happening. Are you surprised at not just the seemingly paper tiger of Iran's air defense system, but the lack of performance of the systems themselves?
No, I'm not surprised by that. And I hate to even bring up to you what I am surprised by so far, because it's so scary. But what I am surprised by is that the Iranian, very, very far-reaching Iranian terror network all across the world hasn't been triggered already. Now, that might be because they've lost their guys. So the intelligence ministry got blown up. Some of these other people may have been blown up. The IRGC commanders are blown up. So I'm hoping that's the reason. That would be a good reason for them not to happen. But to me, that's the biggest surprise. I would have thought that 4 days in, we already would have seen, at least in Europe, where we know they're not as vigilant about this, and frankly, some parts of the United States, but certainly not in Israel, where there's very high vigilance for this kind of terror attack. I would have expected some kind of terror attack by now. Now, the fact that there isn't, it could just be one of those Wizard of Oz moments, right? Remember when the witch melts from the water, all those scary guards and flying monkeys just kind of bow down to Dorothy and it's all over? It could be part of that. That could be part of it. I mean, it's not really out of the realm of possibility. People don't have to remain suicidally terroristic in their lifestyles once the leader goes down or some of their leaders go down. But it could also be that they've lost their connection network. They've lost the person who can trigger these things for them. either way, I'd be happy with the result. But to me, that's the biggest surprise. Not Iran's lack of ability. Listen, they had an air force with all these jets. None of them have taken off. That doesn't really surprise me that much. For years, I always thought to myself, like, yeah, but they're not really getting the best jets. They don't really have. I mean, some of them are really old, so that doesn't surprise me. What surprises me is so far we haven't seen a terror trigger. Of course, it could go off at any time, so I'm not trying to be too optimistic about that, too confident, but I'm happy we've had 4 days of peace on that end at least.
Yeah, I share your concern about that. Matter of fact, I tweeted out almost immediately asking, wonder what their orders are for the cells that common sense tells us there are some cells here inside the United States. And I wonder what their orders are when they get cut off from their order system, because that's probably what's happened. I mean, if we were doing that, we would say, hey, here's what happens if communication's permanently broken. Here's what you do. So maybe their orders were just to stay melted into the background until save it for a rainy day. Who knows? But I share your concern. We got to take a break, Jake. When we come back, I want to talk about the president because the president's he wants to be known as the peace president, and President Trump, he's the America First man. He created it in modern times, and he gets to decide. He said what America First is, but a lot of people are questioning what's happening right now. We'll be right back with Jake Doe.
Good afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon, Brett. And we can now answer a question that you put to Benjamin Netanyahu that he punted on. A U.S. official is telling us just in the last few minutes since your interview concluded that President Trump did, in fact, in the last couple of days, nix a plan that the Israelis were putting together to assassinate the supreme leader of Iran. So we can put a bow on that as President Trump prepares to come and join us here in Canada. And he is telegraphing the way that he will frame this fight between Israel and Iran once he meets with the other G7 leaders. Part of a long Truth Social, he says, we will have peace soon between Israel and Iran. Many calls and meetings now taking place. I do a lot, never get credit for anything, but that's okay. The people understand. Make the Middle East great again.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday. Unfortunately, my guest is American Sunrise Early Edition host Jake Novak, who knows a lot about Israel and the Middle East, that watches us very closely, has been intimately involved in things for many, many years when it comes to this type of activity and reporting on it and those kind of things. And Jake, I wanted to at least devote a segment to this because, look, I'll be honest with you. I think the Israelis and the United States, they were coordinating, right? The president said that was happening, but I think he was caught by surprise, and his negotiating team was caught by surprise when the operation kicked off. And he still wants to seek a peace agreement, but there's a lot of opposition to that on the side of the people that I find myself opposing sometimes, called neocons, especially of the Republican Party. So what is really going on here? I mean, he said that he was not going to keep Israel from acting in its own vital interest. And I happen to agree with that, even though, I'm opposed to U.S. further involvement into another war in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is I feel very gratified by the last 4 days, the massive progress that Israel has been achieving in the last 4 days. Really, really. I mean, in my estimation, Iran is 30% capacity where they were on Thursday. That's how bad they've been hit as far as their overall military and political might. And you know how many American troops, soldiers, sailors, airmen, etc., commandos have been involved? Zero. So this feels very gratifying to me because this is what I've been saying for a long time. That the United States has never had to commit troops or commit to a larger war or commit to a World War III type scenario if Israel took these kinds of actions. Now, anything could happen, but you got to think, if people weren't willing to run to Iran's aid when they still had some relative strength left, why would they run when the game is now, when they're down 34-0? It's like asking people to bet on a team that's down 34-0 at the end of the first quarter and thinking that the same people who wouldn't bet on them when the game hadn't started yet are going to put money down. It's a stupid idea. No one's going to do it. So that's one thing. Second thing is, no matter how much of a fence straddler some people think President Trump is being on this, don't fool yourself. Every other president in American history and every other candidate who lost in the recent elections would have absolutely called for Israel to stop within hours of this action. Mm-hmm. They would have said, okay, that's nice, stop now. And they may, if you got lucky, you'd get a Republican president saying, I urge all sides to stop. But every other president would have said, Israel must stop now. Don't fool yourself. So every day that Trump doesn't say that, which is now 4 days and counting, is the biggest thumbs up green light that Israel could ever hope for, which is why that clip you played before with the Israeli ambassador, he's basically gushing about Trump. You can tell. So Israel is very grateful. They're getting the moral support. That's what Israel has always needed more from the United States, believe it or not, even more than some of the ordnance. It's the moral support which matters more to Israel for a lot of reasons, some of which you can explain very easily, some of which you have to go into more detail to explain. But take my word for it. The moral support from the United States is so much more important to Israel, and they've been getting that the last few days. The last thing I'll say is another thing about Donald Trump. He likes winners. This really reminds me, Colonel Maness, of where LBJ was in the early days and the days leading up to the Six-Day War in June of 1967. Now, LBJ had made it very clear that the United States was going to stay out of this. They didn't want to come in and rush to anyone's aid, even with moral support. They were going to stay out of it. Now, remember, by June of 67, things were starting to get sticky in Vietnam, not as bad as 68, but things were starting to get sticky. He didn't want another war. And so he was staying on the sidelines. But the incredible success that Israel marked in the first day or so of the Six-Day War made it really politically stupid for LBJ not to at least supply that moral support to Israel, which he eventually did. And the real relationship between the United States and Israel, as we know it today, started during that war. Before then, there really wasn't that kind of a relationship. People don't remember that. So I think we're seeing a little bit of that too. You've seen incredible success beyond anyone's imagination, including mine, about what Israel could do in these first 4 days. And Donald Trump's not stupid. He knows a winner when he sees it, and he's going to get on board with it. And by the way, that's good politics. It's not smarmy. It's not cowardly. It's smart politics to see a winner and figure out, hey, this is our friends anyway, and to get on that bandwagon. And I don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with him supporting Israel, but what I'd have a problem with, and I think most people that voted for him have this problem, is getting us involved in another prolonged war, taking offensive actions. There's a lot of pressure amongst Israel supporters inside the United States, as you know, Jake. They're trying to pressure him into using B-2 bombers and the big penetrator bomb that we have. We're the only ones that have the platforms that can carry it and everything to continue to take out this Fordo facility. When I know the way penetrator bombs work is the Israelis just need more time because they have the weapons they need to do it. They're just not as big as those. But what we're seeing here is we see an air bridge being built. I don't know if you saw the reporting on the 30 air tankers that have been shipped out last night, that flew out last night, and they're being placed in strategic positions all along the way. That's called an air bridge. So we're prepping for something, or prepping to be able to do something, more likely, so that the president has an option. And he's got to straddle that line domestically. And I'm not saying straddle the fence, but walk the line domestically and really talk to the American people if he's end up going to do this. and explain it, because the people that I know, including myself, we're adamantly opposed. No offensive action in this. The Israeli Air Force and Defense Forces are doing a fantastic job. They really don't need help.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the type of people who are Israel supporters who say that they want more direct involvement are either very, very naive, or maybe they're not really Israel supporters. That's all I can say, because you're right. It's about time. That's why I made the point about moral support. To me, moral support equals time. I'm sorry, but Israel's been fighting this war since 1948. And every single time when they have this anti-Israel, this destabilizing force, whoever they happen to be fighting at the time, on the ropes, somebody stops them from finishing the job. And what that has been, let me give you the analogy. This is like someone who decides to slowly pull the Band-Aid off and make the pain excruciating over time, as opposed to just ripping it off once and you feel the pain once. And this is what we've been dealing with now for 77 years. This is insane. No one should be continuing to do this as the way Israel has been forced to do this. Let Israel finish this up. Now, if they can do in the next 4 days what they've done in the first 4, this isn't going to be a prolonged war for even Israel, let alone the United States. They need to have that time. They need to, but so far, another thing that's really interesting, forget about the United States calling for Israel to put on the brakes. You're not really hearing anyone from any of the major powers really making a big stink about this. I haven't seen Putin do a video. I haven't seen President Xi do a video. I haven't seen some of these other folks, Macron or Keir Starmer, get on TV and say this has to stop. I'm sure they've said it in some statement, but frankly, they've made no big deal about this. This is a dog that's not barking all over the world. And so that tells me maybe we can finally finish this war this time, because Iran is the head of the snake, not just for Shiite and their own armies, but for the whole idea that terror is the answer, the whole idea that war is the answer in the Middle East. I think a lot of other Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, even Egypt have given up on that years ago. It's time to end it, and let's pull that Band-Aid off fast. And that's the best way to do it. And I think President Trump's the only president in my lifetime who would even allow this to happen right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's impressive. It's impressive. The way he's been able to walk this strategy, and it's a strategy that he's had for a very, very long time, Jake. The one of the things I wanted to ask you about is the United Nations. I'm used to the United Nations being like the mouthpiece of all the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish countries in the world, and even they seem muted to me. Did I miss some kind of report?
No, you haven't missed anything. It's another big dog that's not barking. I'm sure they're all fuming over there, but they haven't been given the directives by their leaders to go do this. Now, this may have something to do with the damage that Israel's done to Iran. I mean, Iran really is, in a lot of ways, a puppet master for some of these mouthpieces at the UN. And it also just might be what we talked about before. Some of these people who have been mouthpieces for years are seeing the writing on the wall and figuring this isn't the time to go out on a limb. Now, some people are still doing it. Some morons, especially on social media, are really doubling and tripling down on their Iranian support and their anti-Israel support. But a lot of other people can do a simple math equation, and they're thinking, you know what, I might need another gig soon. This might be a good time for me not to give any free rhetoric and free browbeating online or on TV before I get the check next time from Qatar, via Iran via Qatar. So that's another thing that's going on. It's very clear that they've been orchestrating this stuff for a long time. No one in their right mind automatically just thinks that we should destroy civilized countries in favor of terrorist regimes, unless they're getting paid to say that. And maybe they're worried about the next check cashing.
Yeah. So how do you think? I have to say something about the Iranian Air Force. I just watched before we came on, probably 2 of the last combat ready, so to speak, F-14 Tomcats to be destroyed on the ground. And their Air Force is not flying. Do you think that it's probably because it's full of pilots that may have been trained by pilots that were trained inside the United States of America? Because we used to train a lot of them.
I think it's because they don't have a directive, and there may be widespread. I mean, we've seen this with Muslim armies. I would say Arab armies, but of course, Iran is not an Arab country. We should make that point from an ethnic standpoint. But we've seen this time and again, where despite all the training, the actual pilots, those are the most educated people in the society. A lot of them come from elite families as well, even in Iran. And they also see the writing on the wall. So maybe that they're not really willing to sit in that cockpit. And by the way, listen, you're the Air Force guy. Is there a technical term for destroying an enemy jet while it's still on the tarmac? I mean, is that like a turkey in bowling? I think it's like that's got to be the most embarrassing thing to have happen to you. It's like getting shut, no hit in a baseball game or something. So I think that might be a big part of it too. If you're one of the few college educated, technically educated people from an elite family in Iran, you're rushing into the cockpit to take on an enemy force that's so much better than yours, that isn't blind like you are as far as having any kind of anti-aircraft or radar. I mean, they're not that stupid. I mean, I know they all talk about suicide bombers. The people that they made suicide bombers usually had severe mental problems, severe emotional problems. Some of them were disgraced in the community. People who really had a good head on their shoulders didn't commit suicide for terrorism reasons. You should know that. And I don't think that there's a lot of pilots like that in the Iranian Air Force who had those kinds of problems.
Nope, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. It's just unfortunate that you see F-14s destroyed on the ground. And here's the deal. You don't get credit for your fighter ace rating. You have to get 5, kill 5 for to become an ace by shooting stuff on the ground. So it's embarrassing for all sides. All right, we'll got to take a break. We'll come back and I want to talk about Fort Al, the earthquakes that have been picked up around it, and what that might mean, and we'll continue this discussion with Jake Novak about Operation Rising Lion and its geostrategic impacts too.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
And as the Israel-Iran conflict escalates, loud explosions were heard near Iran's Fordo nuclear site as it came under Israeli fire. Well, just as Israeli strikes were reported at the nuclear facility, a magnitude 2.5 earthquake struck Iran's QOM province. Now, according to an initial earthquake report from Iran's National Seismological Center, the earthquake in Qom province had a depth of around 10 kilometers. Now, shortly after the earthquake in Qom, another earthquake of magnitude 4.3 struck Iran's Sistan and Balochistan province bordering Pakistan. The twin earthquakes triggered chatter and speculation on social media about whether Israeli strikes at Fordo had triggered the earthquake or Iran had carried out underground nuclear tests. In October last year, similar speculations had emerged after a 4.4 magnitude earthquake had hit the city of Aradan in Iran's Semnan province. Now, back then, the social media was abuzz with speculations over Iran conducting its first underground nuclear test, triggering seismic activity.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and my guest is Jake Novak, the host of Real America's Voices, American Sunrise Early Edition, and we're talking about Operation Rising Lion and its impacts all around the world and here in the United States with Israel protecting its vital interests by stopping Iran from getting its hands on a nuclear weapon that it can deliver. Jake, that little clip there, I want to go into that in a second, but let's take a question from the audience. We had a hand up in the last segment that I didn't get to. Go ahead, Shel.
We have Wib, sir.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you, Jake. I'd like to touch back on the relationship between Israel and the Trump administration. I know especially since October 7th, the Bush admin, Israel was doing a lot of stuff without telling the Biden admin, without telling the Biden anything. Do we still have any of that going on with any of the departments, or are we now fully enmeshed again?
Well, I mean, my answer to that is it's clear that there are still people within the swamp in DC that Israel doesn't trust. And I think that they are much more measured in what they share with the American administration than they would have maybe many years ago. However, it's kind of moot right now. Now, as Israel is fully engaged with Iran, I'm sure that they're being incredibly forthcoming with the Trump administration about just about everything. It was the element of surprise, which is already gone now and has been used to the great extent that it was by Israel. So I would say the answer is probably still yes before they do anything major, but probably at this point right now, I believe it is very, very well coordinated. I just don't think it was as forthcoming as in the last a week or so ago, but now it is. But I don't think the Trump administration was really, really caught off guard in any major way. I'm sure that, we know that, for example, that people were staying at work at the White House the other day, the night before the attack. The pizza index at the Pentagon, those people who watch how many pizza deliveries go to the Pentagon, were noticing a big spike. So they may not have had weeks of notice, but they certainly had some advance notice.
Yeah, the pizza index was developed in Desert Storm when we didn't really have Uber and those kind of things. But now there's apparently an Uber and Lyft index too. And that was the first report that I saw before I even saw the pizza index. Just a little trivia there for you, Jake. So you have the Uber, Lyft index and the pizza index now, and they both seem to agree that night. The Fordo, it's a half a mile deep, 90 meters. It's under granite rock and everything. And one of the risks that I highlighted before this operation kicked off in my risk list, I did a brief one that was radioactive contamination risks. Because when you attack nuclear targets where there's large amounts of fissile material, like this situation is, and most of it, I believe, is in the Fordo complex, that should be a really, really big cause for concern. And then after the IDF struck the two targets in Fordo, the first two, you have these earthquakes going off. Now, they were widely separated and different in size, but one was nearby. It was lower on the Richter scale, I think 2.3, and then the other one was down by the Pakistan border in the southeast part of the country, which is where, honestly, I always thought that their test site would be down by Pakistan so that the Pakistanis could help them. That's been my thought for many, many years now, once I realized they were going after a nuclear weapon. But that's a potential there, this radioactive contamination. Has there been any reporting at all? I haven't seen any. Have you heard anything?
No, and well, one thing we have to remember: Iran is, from a geological point of view, a hot spot for earthquakes in the first place. So a lot of this is a little difficult. You're really dealing with, this isn't like suddenly you see an earthquake in New York City, which we've had a couple of times, but nothing big. So that's a little rough. The second thing is, though, listen, Fordo isn't exactly New York City or downtown LA, but it's also not quite Los Alamos either. It's not that remote as far as being that far away from population centers. You've seen videos, maybe some of you have seen some videos in the last few days of people driving along a highway and taking pictures of explosions there. So, it's close to where there are a lot of people. So this concerns me just on a humanitarian level. Absolutely. And I know that the Israelis don't want to have to deal with a PR disaster of setting off a Chernobyl-like issue over there. However, attacking a weapons facility is a lot different from a total meltdown at a major power plant like we saw at Chernobyl and like we almost saw at 3 Mile Island. Thank God for that. As bad as that could be, it wouldn't be like the kind of thing that we saw at Chernobyl, which, it's got another several decades before we start seeing that area being fully safe to go again and all that kind of stuff in a way that we can do agriculture and things like that. So a lot of different variables here. I absolutely believe, though, that some kind of explosion at the nuclear facility way underground was the source of at least one of those earthquakes. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was a full-on nuclear explosion, but it's the kind that could simulate such a thing. And so we have to be careful. And I certainly would say, I mean, if anyone's listening to me in the region, as much as I'd love to see the video so that we could get more information, don't sacrifice yourself for that. Get out of that area if you can. I don't know if it's easy, I know easy for me to say, but get out of that area if you can. And by the way, I would wish the people who are working at these facilities would also, it's time to mutiny, folks. The school marm and the hall monitor is gone. The intelligence ministry has been blown up. Time to get the heck out of there. You don't want to start a whole revolution on your own? Fine, but at least get the heck out of there. Stop working for this regime just to save your own skin, let alone to start doing the right thing for everyone else.
Yeah, all good points. Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. I saw some great clips, some follow-up clips about how the IDF set up, and Mossad has been given credit for this, set up the little missile launchers that were run by the internet remotely and everything, which is a fantastic operation. I mean, it's right up there. It's not quite Operation Grim Beeper, because I think that's probably the most fantastical military and intelligence operation in the history of the world. Honestly, I mean, beyond the Trojan horse, that's the one. But this was pretty incredible how they were doing this. Do you have any insight into this capability and where the thought process may have come from? Because it caught me by surprise, although we all should have thought about it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know about you. I haven't watched the Oscars in years, and I used to love that show. It would be funny. Wouldn't it be great if there were an award show this year for the best intel operations of the year? We could call the award show the Spookies, because they call spies spooks. I mean, you would have a couple of interesting nominees. You'd have that Ukraine drone attack. You'd have the Beepergate thing, the Grim Beeper. You'd have this stuff in Iran. I mean, it'd be a very interesting show. I would much rather watch it than I don't even know who got nominated this year. So, I mean, that would be awesome. But all kidding aside, look, Israel's ability to really infiltrate the Iranian population is a result of, first of all, that first thing I talked about, the fact that there are still so many Persian Jews living in Israel and other places of the world as well, who are very intimately connected to what's going on in Iran, even now, believe it or not. There's still a cultural, familial connection that many people have, even though they've been exiles for a long time. The Persian Jews I know still on Netflix only watch, pretty much only watch Persian entertainment programs. I mean, they're very connected to the culture in a today type way, not like an old style way. So that opens up a lot of possibilities. But also, Colonel Maness, we know that there are Kurds inside of Iran. We know that there are Iranian citizens inside of Iran. The Iranian regime wasn't able to kill all of them in the 2009 protests and in the 2019 protests, although they did do terrible damage to people and even went to the families of people they killed at the protests and charged them for the bullets that they used to kill their loved ones. That's a true story, by the way, that I reported on for CNBC 6 or 7 years ago. So, by the way, it's pretty bad, but they didn't get all of them. And they know, and there's absolutely help on the ground. This isn't just, you can't, I don't care how good you are at intelligence. You can't just be an outsider, walk into a foreign country, blend in, and get a truck that drives through a downtown area, get an entire building that was built where they were able to launch drones from. So there's a lot of factors involved here, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a combination of all those things. Again, you have whole communities in Israel, blocks or two, where everyone is still living together like they did back in Tehran and other neighborhoods of Tehran. I mean, there are people who have a different, it's like here in the United States. I can tell a Brooklyn accent and tell the difference between a Brooklyn accent and a New Jersey accent.
Yeah.
There are people in North Tehran who can tell that you're speaking in their accent versus Central Tehran. And the Israelis kept that intact. And that opens up a lot of doors for you from an intelligence point of view and being able to blend in and the rest, the rest you can get from your John le Carre novels. But I don't think that they're that far off the mark, frankly.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's unfortunate because I would volunteer to be a co-host with you of the first Spookies Awards, but we might be accused of being callous, unfortunately. But it doesn't have to just be confined to just Western allies. We could look at successful operations across the board because there have been some. The next segment, Jake, I want to talk about this possibility of regime change because President Netanyahu openly brought it up, I think, last night in an interview that he was doing. But I honestly am opposed to America doing regime change operations in countries like Iran, Iraq, because it's just been a terrible, tragic experience every single time on all sides, but especially for my people, our people. Thousands of Americans dead in Afghanistan and Iraq for what? I mean, look at the situation now. So I want to talk about that. We've got a hand up in the audience. We'll take that coming back from the break and continue this discussion. Spookies. I kind of like that. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
And Israel claims that strikes in Iran were needed to set back Tehran's nuclear ambitions. But now it is openly admitting that its military attacks could result in a regime change. So, what's Israel's endgame? While Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel would do whatever it takes to remove the existential threat posed by Tehran. Now, during an appearance on Fox News, he was asked whether this may result in a regime change. This is what he had to say. Listen in.
Could certainly be the result because the Iran regime is very weak. I think it's basically left with two things. It's plans to have atomic bombs and ballistic missiles. That's basically what Iran has. They certainly don't have the people. 80% of the people will throw these theological thugs out. I mean, they murder them, they oppress them for 46 years. They've yearned for freedom.
Israel launched Operation Rising Lion with a surprise attack that wiped out the top echelon of Iran's military command and damaged its nuclear sites. But since then, Israel has also widened its range of targets.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking about this operation that the Israeli Defense Forces and the nation of Israel has felt compelled to undertake because of the intelligence that was showing. And I know that the Prime Minister Netanyahu said something about between 6 and 12 months or 12 months to 2 years as far as their expectations based on the previous reporting as far as getting a weapon. But those are all very difficult estimates to make a reality when it comes to understanding them. And if it was my country that was being under the gun so close to a nation like Iran, I would be recommending that my president take immediate action if we had that kind of intelligence. And my guest today is Jake Novak. Jake, we got a hand up.
Rob, this is Radio Canada 349. I'm actually on the amplitude.
Sorry about that, Colonel. Go ahead with the hand.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take our question from our audience. Go ahead, Shell.
Go ahead, Cookie.
Good afternoon. Thanks for this great show today. I got two questions. One, are there factions within Iran who may be assisting Israel or just taking upon themselves to eliminate some of the military leaders and such? And then my second question, if you have time, is the religious, like the Khomeini and his religious crew, are they sort of off limits for strikes?
So the first answer I can answer really quickly, absolutely. I mean, I talked about the Kurds. You know, the Kurds make up a significant amount of the population of Iran. They've never been loyal to the Iranian regime as it is now, and they have been great allies to the United States, great allies to Israel. The question is how much they're going to expose themselves in some kind of all-out support. But they've been very supportive. And then there are individual dissidents within the Iranian population who have been helpful. The second question, this is really interesting because we've been talking about this. Prime Minister Netanyahu says that, it's not off the table to assassinate Ali Khamenei, who is supposedly a religious leader. But of course, by the way, I've always wanted to do a little bit of a Quran Jeopardy with these people who are supposedly so knowledgeable of religion. They said that about Soleimani also, and al-Baghdadi. I'm not so sure they're so great geniuses on the Quran, right? And by the way, who do you compare them to? It's not like you have, by the way, there's an international Bible contest every year in Israel for high school students, and it's really, really hard to win. I don't know if these guys could win the international Quran contest. And I'm not just saying that as a joke. I'm not so sure these people are so well versed in the Sharia law and Quran as they're supposed to, just because they dress that way. So that's one thing. But look, and Carol Maness will, I'm sure probably agree with me about this. The idea that the United States and world leaders don't assassinate each other is an old tradition that has been going on. It's almost like a gentleman's agreement. I think it reached its zenith at a time in Europe before World War I, when just about every world leader in Europe was first cousins. They were all like related to Queen Victoria. I think, listen, I don't love the idea of targeting people individually necessarily, but I'm so tired of not even considering it when it could save hundreds of thousands of lives. I mean, really, should we really not target Ali Khamenei and say to ourselves, now let's go to war for 5 more years because we don't want to kill the leader? Because, if we do that, then they'll come after our guy. Well, that's too late. They already came after Donald Trump at least twice. They tried to assassinate him. So honestly, I am really not necessarily against that. I think that it's something that should be considered. If it really leads to a quick end to all the hostilities, what's the argument for saving this guy's life when he's already tried to kill our president? I just don't get it. So, and they certainly tried to kill Netanyahu a gazillion times too. So frankly, I think all bets are off. And, again, calling them religious leaders, sure, they're sort of from the religious wing, but I'd really like to see, I want to give them an SAT for the Quran before I really believe they're such great scholars. I'm not so sure, frankly. I'm really not.
Well, Khamenei, he's really the head of state, so he's a target. He's in command through the IRGC. That's who maintains control inside of Iran and suppresses anybody that's anti crazy Islamist. And they do everything from beheading them to hanging them, chopping them up in public, shooting them. For no reason. I mean, even young like soccer stars and things like that because they get sideways with them. So he's a military target. That's my answer to that. Look, if you're in a war and the Iranians are at war with Israel, they've been at it for decades now. Then your leaderships are military targets. The president of the United States, not secondary, but co-title besides president and head of state is commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That's a target. It's a valid military target if you're at war with each other. So that's my answer to that. Look, as a military target, I'd be very surprised if the IDF had the opportunity and they said, we're going to take it, that anybody would argue with it. Would you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, it's as simple as that. And again, the idea that these people are untouchable anyway. This is not a pope. This is not an Archbishop of Canterbury. This is outrageous. This guy is a head of state who has approved all of the brutality, all of it. And he's been leader much longer than the original Ayatollah, much longer. He's been leader since 1989. This is one of the longest reigning leaders in the world. And he's committed so many acts of horrible murder and things.
Yeah, and that's why I agree with you. I mean, Israel needs to finish the job. That's my hope for them is to be able to finish this job. Let's talk about regime change for a second there. President or Prime Minister Netanyahu referred to the Iranian people, the Persians, who are under this oppression from these Islamist fundamentalists, the mullahs and their crew, and have been for these many years. Is there enough internally opposition that could resource itself to be able to rise up on their own? Because look, I don't advocate for my country getting involved on the ground. I don't think the Israeli Defense Force has the capability to put an armed force big enough on the ground to even support a counterinsurgency or an insurgency against this government. We've seen the bad outcomes of that around the world, especially when the United States is involved. That's why I think most people are adamantly opposed to that kind of activity. The other issue is, yeah, it's an old civilization, but so was Iraq, wasn't it? I mean, Persian's a little bit more homogeneous and non-fractured, but when you look at the diaspora, the people that are on the outside of the country that are Persian, they're fractured. They're not all one big group on the same goal to get things done the same way. So that's a lot of pause for concern there. Even though I don't think the United States would get involved in anything like that, but just an uprising for regime change inside the country is giving people pause.
Yeah, there was, you talked about all the failures that we've had with regime change. The best successes that we've had were culturally. For example, Vietnamization from a cultural and economic point of view, huge success. We Americanized them, but we didn't create a regime that was pro-America. The same thing I think was happening in Iraq and other places like that. Culturally, we get these people to be a little bit more modern, but they don't produce leaders who are pro-American. There is one example, though, in American history where we put together regime change, and it's the most successful example probably in the history of the world, and that's what happened in Japan. General MacArthur's military governorship was, people think of him as just a military genius, and he was, and I still believe he's the greatest general in American history. But but maybe in many ways, the way that he was able to get Japan back on its feet and on the right track might have been his most brilliant career. And I have a lot of personal windows into this because my uncle was one of his top interpreters at the end of the war and then during that military governorship. So I know a lot about it. And one of the things General MacArthur was able to do is work within the factions within Japan to modernize that country. He made sure that women got the vote and could run for office, not because he was such a feminist, although he wasn't exactly a caveman either, but not because he was such a feminist, but because he knew that they needed new blood. He couldn't just get the old aristocrats there to sort of roll over. And that was a huge deal. And they didn't want to do it. They told General MacArthur, oh, no, we're not ready for women to have the vote. He said, okay, I'll stick around for another 6 years. I don't care. You guys better do this or you're never going to get your freedom back. He also made sure to not execute, but to humiliate Hirohito, the emperor. There was a big argument. Should they execute him? He was plenty guilty of a lot of war crimes. Yeah. We could have executed Hirohito, and he didn't do that. Now, who could play that kind of a role for Iran? I don't know. I can tell you that, look, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, who for most of his life, I don't think ever wanted to set foot in Iran again, no matter what he was saying, because he was having a good life in Beverly Hills. I think now he's over 60. He realizes now that there's, he's had his fun, he's had his freedom. I think he would be willing to go back, but only as a head of state. This guy is not a technocrat. This guy can't form a government and actually form a functioning society. He can act as a head of state. He can act as someone who can speak out for some of the people and help some of the exiles come in who are very smart and successful. But this is going to have to be a government that's run by exiles. And if they're fractured, as you say, Colonel Maness, they're going to have to figure out how to do that in sort of a bipartisan way. Like, okay, we'll have votes, we'll have decisions about who gets what. But our goal here is to sort of put together a government. We're going to have this much time to do it. And Pahlavi, the Shah's son, can be our king, sort of, our head of state. He can cut the ribbons and he can do the ceremonies. But we have to figure out how to get democracy going. And they need time to do that. But it's possible. I think it's possible.
Yeah, and groups like the NCRI, they've been working on this for several decades too. But those two groups I think, are the two largest exile groups, or the Pahlavi faction and the NCRI faction. They are vehemently opposed to each other, from what I've seen, and that's a problem right now. I mean, you can't pull this off unless you can get all sides that are on the outside that have been working this issue. Because I think the one side, the NCRI guys, have the policy stuff developed, ready to go, and Mr. Pahlavi has not been doing that kind of stuff. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I could be. I'm just I'm kind of pontificating here and encouraging them to talk to each other, because I've seen the in between those two sides before in my own personal experience. And I don't know if the Pahlavis have anybody on the inside. I know the NCRI folks do have some folks on the ground there, and it's got to start somewhere. I hope that they will come together and conference together, or are already doing that.
Yeah, well, they could also do kind of a parliamentary thing where the Kurds get a say, and they sort of work that out. Like that's this crazy thing in Iraq that's been going on. I don't love that either because that's just that's just tribalism, and I don't think Iran is going to want to go that direction. But they could do what MacArthur did with those diametrically opposed defeated Japanese. He allowed them to decide it within their own cells of the prisons that the United States was monitoring. I mean, every night there was another person dead in those cells, and people came to the general and they said, well, I don't know if this is so ethical, General. These two opposing factions are killing each other. And he said, like, well, we could have one dead every night in these jails or 100,000 dead in the streets of Tokyo. What would you rather have me do? And, again, that was another really brilliant move by him, probably saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And now we have a really good ally in Japan. I don't care what people think about Japan. It's one of our best allies. And that is much thanks to General MacArthur and his brilliance.
That's a good idea. Well, thanks Jake, so much for coming on today. This discussion has to be had, and it has to continue. And the American leadership needs to hear it because there's a lot of pathways that could be taken, and there's one or one and a half right ones. Donald Trump, I think, is on it right now, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. Every day, new things are occurring. I'll see you tomorrow on Training Tuesday. Joe Lombardi, we're talking about maybe even being your own bank and being financially healthy in these trying times.
You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries, research, high-profile interviews, and the radio and